The storm broke over Fairview County with the rage of a wounded beast. Rain pummeled the tin roofs of the old fairgrounds, drumming a frantic rhythm into the muddy earth below. Lightning clawed jagged fingers across the black sky, and the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls. Beneath the angry heavens, the fairgrounds had become a mire of puddles and sinking boots, the air heavy with the scent of wet hay, diesel fumes, and old rust. Jake Morgan moved through the chaos like a ghost. His jacket was soaked through, clinging to his battered frame. Mud pulled at his boots with every step, each footfall a small battle. His face was worn, a map of silent wars etched deep into his skin. The storm outside mirrored the one raging quietly inside him, a relentless churning sea of memories he couldn't outrun. Row upon row of cages lined the auction yard. Inside them, dogs barked, whimpered, and growled, each one labeled with bright, crude signs. Unfit, failed, aggressive. Their futures hung in the balance, auctioned off for pennies in a place that smelled of despair and wet metal. Jake's gaze swept past the cages without focus until it snagged on one. Inside a battered pen, a German shepherd crouched low, muscles taut, eyes gleaming with a feral, haunted fear. His fur was slick from the rain, his teeth bared at the world beyond the bars. A warped, dripping tag clung to the cage door, scrawled with the name Axel. Around the cage, people gave a wide berth, whispering and pointing with wary glances. The dog was a lost cause, another broken thing the world had discarded. Jake stood motionless, the rain soaking into his very bones, as he watched Axel with a stillness that seemed carved from stone. Something ancient and unspoken passed between them, two battered souls recognizing one another across a gulf of pain. When the bidding began, few stayed to watch. The storm worsened, the fairground becoming a battlefield of swirling mud and grit. Yet Jake remained rooted there, as if the very earth held him fast. When the moment came, Jake's decision was made, not with fanfare or words, but with a quiet inevitability, like the slow turning of a river wearing down stone. Without hesitation, without calculation, the path had already chosen him. The gavel cracked against the auction block, sealing a silent pact. As Axel was loaded into the back of Jake's battered truck, the storm roared on, drowning the world in darkness and noise. The drive home was a blur of headlights slicing through sheets of rain and the whisper of tires struggling for grip on waterlogged roads. Jake's hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled tension, the shadows inside the cab thick and restless. The cabin stood alone at the edge of a dying forest, a small, weathered structure surrendered to the elements. Its windows glowed, dimly against the oppressive black, a fragile defiance against the storm. Jake pulled into the gravel driveway, the truck shuddering to a halt. For a long moment he sat there, the rain hammering against the roof, the air inside the truck thick with the smell of wet dog and damp canvas. Axel remained caged in the back, his body coiled tight, his eyes darting, always searching for the next threat. Inside the cabin, the wood floors creaked under Jake's heavy boots. The place was simple, a fireplace choked with ash, a battered armchair worn to the shape of its owner, and walls lined with faded photographs that looked like they belonged to another life. He left Axel space to adjust, moving slow, deliberate. Food and water were placed carefully. The cage door was left ajar, a silent offer of trust. Hours passed in heavy silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant grumble of thunder. Jake sat in the armchair, eyes half closed, while Axel watched from the shadows, his breathing shallow, every muscle ready to bolt. When the first nightmare came, it tore Jake from sleep with brutal force. He thrashed against invisible enemies, hands clawing at the air. In the dim light, Axel growled low and fearful, pacing at the edge of the room caught between flight and frozen terror. Outside, the storm raged on, relentless and uncaring. Inside, two broken beings fought battles no one else could see. Days blurred into nights, a slow grind of fragile routines. Trust was not given, but painstakingly built. Every move was a negotiation, every small step forward a quiet victory. Jake worked the land around the cabin, repairing broken fences and clearing brush, his body moving out of habit while his mind remained a battlefield. Axel followed at a distance, wary but observant, his instincts at war with a dawning curiosity. Loud noises shattered the fragile peace. A car backfiring down the distant road would send Jake to the ground, heart hammering against his ribs, while Axel barked in blind panic, circling wildly, teeth bared at shadows. There were moments of anger, of frustration, when old scars threatened to tear them both apart. Axel snapped once, teeth grazing Jake's hand when cornered by accident. Blood welled bright against pale skin, but no anger came, only understanding. The raw, aching knowledge of fear's heavy hand. On sleepless nights, when the cabin felt too small and the ghosts too loud, Jake and Axel would sit on the porch under the vast, indifferent stars. The woods whispered around them, and the world shrank to the rhythmic sound of shared breathing. Healing came not in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of tiny mercies. A tentative tail wag, a steadying hand on fur during a thunderstorm, eyes that once held only fear beginning to show something softer, something fragile and fierce. The fire started in the woods beyond the cabin, a spark carried by the wind, igniting the brittle undergrowth. It moved fast, hungry and merciless, a red serpent twisting through the trees. Jake smelled the smoke before he saw it. Instinct seized him, years of training snapping into place. He raced outside, his mind already mapping escape routes, calculating risks. Axel stood rigid at the edge of the porch, hackles high, the distant glow of fire reflecting in his eyes. Through the smoke, a frantic shouting rose the neighboring house down the lane, where an elderly widow lived alone. Without hesitation, Jake vaulted into the truck, Axel leaping into the passenger seat, fear overridden by something stronger, the bond, forged in shared survival. The road was a blur of smoke and flame. Trees crashed around them, sparks hissing against the windshield. When they reached the house, the front door hung open, the porch sagging dangerously under the heat. Jake plunged inside without thought for himself, the heat slamming into him. Like a fist, Axel followed, weaving through the smoke, nose to the ground. They found the woman collapsed near the back door, overcome by smoke. Jake scooped her up, muscles screaming, and staggered back into the choking darkness. Axel led the way, barking, herding, refusing to leave. Together, they made it out into the night, collapsing in the wet grass as flames devoured the building. Behind them, sirens wailed in the distance, the fire department too late to save the house, but in time to save the people who had escaped it. The story spread through the town like wildfire. Strangers began to wave when Jake passed, their wary glances softening into respect. Axel became a symbol of unlikely heroism, the broken dog who saved a life. A local therapist approached Jake with a new idea: therapy dog certification, a chance for Axel to help others who carried invisible wounds. The process was long and grueling. Training pushed them both to their limits, but something in them had shifted. Where once there was only pain, now there was purpose. Together, they visited hospitals and community centers, offering comfort to veterans, children, and anyone battling storms of their own. Axel, once feared and cast aside, now moved through crowds with a quiet dignity, sensing pain and offering wordless companionship. Jake found something too, a place in the world that did not demand he forget his scars, but honored the strength it took to live with them. On a crisp autumn morning, Jake and Axel stood at the edge of a hill overlooking the town. The fields stretched golden and endless around them, and the river shimmered like molten silver under the rising sun. Jake's hand rested lightly on Axel's head, the touch casual, natural. Below them, life stirred a world still broken, still messy but full of stubborn, relentless hope. The wind carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, and somewhere in the distance a child laughed. Jake and Axel turned toward the sound, stepping forward together into the brightening day. Two survivors made whole not by forgetting, but by enduring and by finding in each other a reason to keep walking. The following months unfolded like the slow turning of seasons, each day inching Jake and Axel closer to a new kind of peace. Yet healing was never a straight path. The past clung to Jake's mind with barbed hooks, surfacing in the quiet moments when the sun dipped low and the long shadows of memory grew tall. Sometimes, while Axel lay at his feet, Jake would sit for hours in the armchair, staring at the dying fire, seeing faces that were no longer here, hearing voices swallowed by time. Guilt and grief wrapped themselves around him like a second skin. Axel sensed these moments long before they broke the surface. He would rise silently, pressing his weight against Jake's legs, grounding him with a presence that asked for nothing, demanded nothing, but simply existed alongside the hurt. Outside, the forest shed its summer green for the fierce golds and reds of autumn. The trees stood like solemn sentinels, their leaves falling in slow, spiraling descents that blanketed the earth in quiet beauty. Jake began to find small rituals of repair, mending broken things with his hands, a loose fence board, a leaky roof shingle, a splintered porch rail, tasks that anchored him to the present, each nail driven a defiance against despair. Axel followed him everywhere, no longer shadowing, from a distance but walking in step, his ears pricking at every sound, his nose twitching in the cool air. Together, they moved through the world with a kind of battered grace, scarred but still standing. The hospital loomed large and sterile against the grey sky, its glass windows coldly reflecting the overcast clouds. Inside, the scent of antiseptic and distant sadness filled the air. Jake adjusted the vest Axel now wore, a symbol of the journey they had fought to reach this place. Therapy Dog, a title that spoke volumes not about perfection, but perseverance. The pediatric ward was a world painted in soft colors and muted hope. Children moved through the halls, some in wheelchairs, some trailing IV stands like reluctant companions. Their eyes held a wisdom far older than their years, a deep knowing forged by pain. Axel stepped forward first, unhesitating. His posture was relaxed, his tail a gentle, slow wag of welcome. Children reached tentative hands toward him, and Axel responded with infinite patience, lowering his great head to their level, allowing their small fingers to tangle in his fur. Jake watched from a careful distance at first, every muscle taut, as if expecting some sudden failure. But as the minutes stretched into hours, he saw something extraordinary unfold. The children changed in Axel's presence. Their faces softened, their shoulders uncurled. Laughter, light, pure and rare, spilled into the sterile corridors. In Axel, they saw not a perfect hero, but a survivor. In Axel's scars, they recognized their own. Jake felt something in his chest unclench, a knot loosening, a wall crumbling. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself a breath without the weight of the past crushing it. Winter descended on Fairview County with a merciless grip. Snow fell in thick, heavy drifts, muffling the world into silence. The cabin creaked and groaned under the weight of the storm, the wind rattling the windows like a living thing. Outside, the forest was transformed into a monochrome wasteland. Trees bowed under glittering ice, the ground a treacherous maze of hidden dangers. Jake and Axel adapted as they always did, finding rhythm even in hardship. Morning runs through the snow, their breath clouding in the frigid air. Long nights by the fire, the howl of the wind a distant chorus to their shared solitude. But winter tested more than endurance. Isolation crept back into Jake's mind, whispering old lies in the dark. There were nights when sleep abandoned him entirely, when he sat awake until dawn, listening to the crack and pop of the wood stove, feeling the old familiar ache settle into his bones. Axel stayed close during these times, his body curled tightly at Jake's feet, his presence a silent sentinel against the creeping darkness. Together they weathered the storm, not with heroics, but with stubborn, quiet resilience. Spring broke the winter's hold like a miracle. The snow melted into rushing streams, the earth waking from its long slumber in bursts of green and gold. Yet even as the land healed, Jake faced a new battle, unseen and insidious. In town, there were moments when crowds pressed too close, when the noise and chaos pressed against his mind like a vice. His breathing would quicken, his vision narrowing to a tunnel of panic. Axel sensed these fractures instantly. He would lean into Jake's side, a living anchor pulling him back to solid ground. The therapy program grew, and with it came new places, new faces. Jake found himself standing before groups of veterans and school children alike, sharing not with words, but with presence a story of survival. He rarely spoke aloud. He didn't need to. Axel did the speaking in his way, through the patience in his gaze, the steadiness of his step, the simple, stubborn fact of his existence. Each handshake, each smile, each whispered thank you stitched tiny new threads into Jake's heart, mending places he thought were beyond repair. Word of their work spread beyond Fairview. An invitation came, a ceremony to honor therapy teams making a difference. Jake did not want accolades. Recognition sat uneasy on his shoulders, but he understood that this was not just about him or even Axel. It was about showing others that brokenness was not the end. It was a beginning. The ceremony was held in a grand hall, flags hanging heavy from the rafters, the air thick with pride and sorrow. Jake stood stiffly in his only suit, Axel sitting proud at his side, his vest polished to a deep sheen. When they called his name, the applause rose like a wave, not deafening but warm and real. Jake accepted the plaque with a steady hand, but it was Axel who received the true honor, a medal hung gently around his neck. A symbol not of service denied, but of a different, deeper kind of service. Together, they stood on that stage, a man and a dog once written off by the world, now testaments to the power of second chances. Time moved on as it always did. The seasons shifted. The cabin weathered new storms and basked under new suns. Jake and Axel continued their work, not for glory, but for the quiet, stubborn belief that healing was possible for anyone, anywhere, given patience, given kindness. There were setbacks, always. Hard days where old ghosts clawed their way back, nights when fear sat heavy in the lungs. But there was strength too, greater than the weight of the past. It lived in every hand Axel touched, every heart he comforted. It lived in Jake's own bones, in the way he now stood a little taller, laughed a little easier, dared to look the future in the eye without flinching. On a bright morning, with the river singing in the valley below, Jake and Axel set out on a dirt path winding through the trees. The sun danced between the branches, casting dappled light. Across the trail they walked without urgency, without fear. Just two souls, battered but unbroken, moving forward. Each step was a prayer, each breath a victory. And somewhere ahead, unseen but certain, a new chapter waited, not free of struggle, but full of promise. Together, they would meet it. Together, they would endure. Together, they would rise. In the months that followed, Jake and Axel found themselves becoming a fixture in places where hope was needed most. Hospitals, rehabilitation centers, shelters tucked away in forgotten corners of the county. Jake, once a man who shrank from crowds, now walked the halls with a quiet strength. Axel by his side, the steady beat of their bond unspoken but unmistakable. There was a boy at the children's hospital, thin and frail beneath a mountain of blankets, whose body fought a war of its own against unseen enemies. His hands trembled with every breath, his gaze wary and shuttered. When Axel entered the room, the boy's defenses cracked just a little. His hand, skeletal and shaking, reached out with cautious hope. Axel moved closer, slow and sure, until the boy's fingers curled into his fur. The transformation was not loud, it was not sudden. But in the days that followed, the boy's laughter returned in cautious bursts and color crept back into his cheeks. Jake watched from the doorway, a fierce, quiet pride swelling in his chest. In Axel's patient presence, he saw reflected the journey they both had taken, from fear to trust, from brokenness to something strong and enduring. Each visit built another bridge between pain and healing, between despair and resilience. Jake and Axel crossed those bridges again and again, leading others across them too. One evening, as the last light faded from the sky, Jake stood before the cracked mirror in the cabin bathroom. For a long time he stared at his reflection, as if seeing himself for the first time. The man who looked back at him was older than the one who had shipped off to foreign sands years ago. His eyes held a weight they had not then carried, but also a depth, a capacity for empathy that could only be born from survival. His scars, the ones carved across his skin, the ones no one could see, were still there. They always would be. But now they were not symbols of defeat. They were marks of endurance. Axel lay in the hallway beyond, his body stretched out in peaceful sleep, his breathing steady, the occasional twitch of a paw chasing unseen dreams. Jake turned from the mirror, leaving behind the ghost of the man he once was, stepping back into the life he had fought so hard to rebuild. Spring brought the town's annual Festival of Light, a celebration of renewal, a tribute to survival after another long winter. Lanterns floated above the river, their reflections shimmering like stars scattered across dark waters. Music drifted through the warm night air, blending with the laughter of children and the low hum of conversation. Jake had avoided the festival in years past, unable to bear the press of bodies, the sharp bursts of fireworks that mimicked the sounds of combat too closely. But this year was different. Axel walked at his side, his vest signaling his purpose, his presence a calm current in the bustling crowd. Jake kept one hand on Axel's back, grounding himself against the rising tide of noise and light. Step by step they moved through the crowd, not hurried, not hunted. Faces turned toward them, not with pity but with recognition. Nods of respect, smiles of welcome. Under the soft glow of lantern light, Jake lifted his gaze to the sky, watching as flame-lit globes carried whispered wishes into the heavens. He did not make a wish. He simply stood there, breathing in the moment, the sharp, sweet air filling his lungs without pain. He was here. He had endured. He had found his way home. The healing Jake and Axel carried with them did not stop at hospital walls or festival grounds. It spread outward, touching lives Jake never expected to reach. There was a young Marine, freshly home and drowning in nightmares, who found his way to Jake's door one rain-soaked night. He sat on the porch, hollow-eyed and trembling, while Jake brought him a blanket and Axel curled quietly against his legs. There was a widowed teacher who had lost her son overseas and found herself adrift in grief. Axel rested his great head in her lap one afternoon, and she cried into his fur until the tears ran dry and her hands found strength to pet him once more. Each story braided itself into the larger tapestry of their lives, a mosaic of pain and hope, brokenness and rebuilding. Jake saw it now clearly. Survival was not a solitary act. Healing was not a private war. It was a gift passed from one battered heart to another, a light carried forward even through the darkest nights. There were still bad days. There were still mornings when Jake woke tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, heart racing from battles fought only in dreams. There were still sudden noises that sent adrenaline surging through his veins like wildfire. Axel weathered these storms with him, steadfast and unshaken, a living, breathing lifeline. On those days, Jake did not retreat. He did not fall back into isolation. He ran trails with Axel bounding joyfully ahead, their bodies slicing through the cold, clean air. He chopped wood, the steady rhythm grounding him to the present. He sat by the river watching the water weave its eternal path through rock and root. He fought for his peace, every hour, every breath, and slowly, steadily, the storms inside him lost their power to destroy. One golden morning, Jake dug his hands into the earth, planting the first saplings that would one day shade the land around his cabin. Axel roamed nearby, nose deep in the grass, chasing invisible scents. Each tree was a promise, a living testament to the future he had once been too afraid to imagine. As he pressed the fragile roots into the soil, Jake felt a kind of reverence, a kind of hope that asked for nothing more than patience and care. Like his own healing, these trees would grow slowly, quietly against the odds, but they would grow. Years passed. The cabin weathered new seasons, its wood darkened by rain and sun, but standing strong. The forest thickened, wrapping the clearing in green arms. Axel grew older. His muzzle silvered, his movements slowed, but the light in his eyes never dimmed. Jake too changed. His hair showed streaks of gray. His stride carried the easy weight of a man who knew exactly who he was. They still worked, still visited the hospital and the school, still walked the trails together, though now at a gentler pace. On a soft summer evening, Jake sat on the porch with Axel at his feet. Fireflies danced in the growing dusk and the stars blinked awake one by one. Jake leaned back, listening to the night sounds, the rustle of leaves, the murmur of the river, the steady, faithful rhythm of Axel's breathing. This was home, not just the place, but the life they had built together, scar by scar, step by step. A life shaped by struggle but defined by resilience, a life full of second chances. The seasons turned as they always did, but now Jake noticed the subtleties more keenly, the way the maples burned crimson for just a handful of days, the way the river sang louder after spring rains. Time left its marks, gentle and irrevocable. Axel's once boundless energy became a dignified, deliberate pace. His eyes, clouded slightly with age, still sparkled with intelligence, but his steps grew cautious. His days of bounding through the fields like a creature born of wind and fire softened into slow walks under the sheltering arms of the old oaks. Jake adjusted without complaint. The bond between them had transcended utility or even habit. It was simply a truth now, like gravity, like the changing of seasons, like the sunrise. They belonged to each other in the way only the wounded who have healed together can. The town, too, had changed. New houses, new families. Children who once clutched their parents' hands in fear now ran to greet Axel with squeals of delight. Jake watched it all unfold with a steady heart, accepting the bittersweet nature of time. He had once feared change. Now, he understood it was only another form of growth. It was a soft morning in early autumn when Jake woke and found Axel sitting by the door. His body still strong, his gaze steady but tired. Jake knew. The walk they took that morning was slow, the mist clinging low to the ground, the world painted in muted shades of gold and grey. They followed the familiar trail along the river, past the bending willows and the rocks worn smooth by years of water's gentle touch. Axel moved with careful grace, stopping often to lift his nose to the wind, as if memorizing the sense of home one last time. Jake walked beside him, every step a prayer of gratitude for every shared mile, every silent moment of understanding, every heartbeat spent together. When they returned to the cabin, Axel curled up on the porch, the sun warming his aging bones. Jake sat with him, one hand resting lightly on his fur, feeling the steady, slowing rhythm of his friend's breath. And when Axel's breathing finally grew still, it was with the peace of a life fully lived, a bond fully honored, a love that would not die with the body but would live on, stitched into the very fabric of Jake's being. The river sang its endless song nearby, the breeze whispered through the trees, and the world somehow held still for a little while longer, honoring a hero's passing. Grief came as it always did, sharp, relentless, a tide that threatened to pull Jake under. But unlike before, Jake did not fight it. He let it wash through him, let it carve new space in his heart, where the memory of Axel could live unbound and undiminished. Friends from town came with quiet kindness. Children wrote notes in shaky handwriting, leaving them at the foot of the cabin porch. Veterans Jake had helped through dark nights stopped by, each one leaving small tokens, a photo, a flag, a simple carved nameplate that read, "Faithful." Jake built a small garden near the edge of the woods, where Axel had loved to roam. Wildflowers filled the space, bright bursts of color defiantly blooming against the wild backdrop. A stone marked the center, simple and strong. On it, one word, family. Time moved forward. One spring morning, Jake found himself standing before a litter of young pups at the animal shelter, their eyes wide with curiosity and hope. He hadn't come intending to adopt. His heart still ached with loss, the space Axel left behind tender and raw. But as one clumsy, big-pawed pup stumbled toward him, tail wagging with reckless abandon, Jake felt something stir inside, not a replacement for what was lost, but an extension of it. He knelt, letting the pup climb awkwardly into his lap, licking his hands, trusting completely without fear. In that simple, messy, joyful connection, Jake recognized the beginning of a new journey. He named the pup Chance. The years that followed were filled with new stories, new lives touched, new bridges built. Jake, older now, wiser, carried Axel's lessons in every step he took with Chance at his side. The pup grew into a strong, compassionate partner, guided by the spirit of the one who had come before. The therapy work expanded. Jake helped train other veterans with dogs, showing them how to build bonds from trust instead of fear, how to heal, not by forgetting their scars, but by honoring them. His own scars no longer felt like burdens, they felt like maps, each one telling the story of survival, of redemption, of the impossible beauty that could grow from broken ground. On a summer afternoon, Jake and Chance sat atop the same hill he and Axel had stood upon years ago. The field stretched before them, golden and endless. The river shimmered in the sunlight, laughing its way toward the horizon. Jake leaned back, feeling the earth solid beneath him, the sky endless above him, the heartbeat of life thrumming all around. He closed his eyes, breathing in the sweet, wild scent of the world he had fought so hard to stay in. He was not a man untouched by sorrow. He was a man who had learned that sorrow was not the end of love, that grief was not stronger than hope, that broken things, given time and care, could become beautiful again. Beside him, Chance lay with his head resting on Jake's knee, the steady rhythm of his breathing blending into the soft rustle of the wind. Together, they watched the future unfold, unknown, unpromised, but full of endless possibilities. Together they moved forward, bearing the light of all they had lost and all they had found. Together they lived.